But let's, I guess, bringing it back to why this matters for soil and growing plants and things like that. This is a somewhat of an emerging field of research in terms of the ecological effect of soil viruses, because we have the soil food web kind of schematic is you have like bacteria and fungi at the bottom, and then they're getting eaten by the soil predators, and then the plants are consuming that. But viruses are pretty abundant in the soil, and a significant percentage of bacterial cell death in the soil is caused by viruses. So with that traditional soil food web model where it's the bacteria are there and then they're getting eaten by protozoa or nematodes and excreted, viruses attacking bacteria and then replicating inside them and bursting their cells open, this is another mechanism that leads to like nutrients leaking out of bacteria cells and becoming potentially available for plants. And like I said, this is kind of an emerging field of knowledge. A lot of like the big papers that have been written on this have only come out in the last few years. There's a research lab at University of Tennessee that is kind of at one of the labs at the forefront of this. The PI's name is Mark Radesevich, I believe. But they are starting to better characterize that you have all these viruses in the soil. One interesting thing is because viruses are so much smaller than bacteria, theoretically they could be inhabiting much smaller little crevices and nooks and crannies in the three-dimensional soil architecture than bacteria can. So maybe they can be hiding out there, and then once a host organism comes by, they can pop out and start, I was about to say feeding on them, but that's the wrong term because that's not what viruses do. But ultimately, this is something that probably is really important in the nutrient cycling, and not just soil, but in all ecosystems. So it's like kind of a cool like frontier of knowledge that I had the opportunity. I was to attend a presentation online given by this researcher and like asked, what are potential applications of this soil virus knowledge for, growing plants, improving yields and fertility? And the answer was more or less, we don't understand enough about this topic to really be able to use it for any application at this point, but we're still trying to understand it more. Maybe it will, but it makes it an exciting topic because it's something that, truly is a frontier.
Yeah. And the interesting part too is that we believe, again, theoretically, that these viruses are able to switch things on and off within the cell as well, therefore kind of pushing evolution or de-evolution, depending on which way you want to look at it. So they are a really interesting emerging understanding of the minutia of the soil food web. I mean, just the fact that, we now truly believe or understand that the bacteria can change pH in the soil. That was something that when I first started talking about that years ago, people laughed and said, that's bullshit. The biology can't shift the pH. And it's like, all right, well, what's shifting the pH in the root zone then? Why is this plant mining this material when the pH is not appropriate for that material or mineral to be released? And so maybe it goes even deeper than what we're talking about right now. What do you guys feel about that?
Yeah, so kind of like the soil, and this is something too and this is a lot of the work that Elaine did for this advocacy, understanding the biology is critical in the soil, right? And this is coming from the understanding of like okay, how we study soils, right? It came from geology, right? And then geological chemistry, right? If you look up an old agriculture textbook, you can grow these plants within this pH range, which means you got to add this many tons of lime, and you're basically treating it as just a growth medium, not something that's alive. So more recently, as we understood biology, it's a capital B, Bio-Geochemistry, right? And so, the reality is your soil is like that parent material, the sand, silt, and clay. That's the texture of your soil, right? The organic matter, right? And then also to the biology, right? So we often think about, why, like one analogy talking about how important it is to understand this connection between the biology, the organic matter, and your, the actual texture is like, why do you put lotion on your skin? Why do you varnish a table, right? You're protecting it from oxidation, right? You're protecting that oxygen is everywhere and you can shred it. So with good soil, right, even if people will apply compost, I think one of the biggest mistakes we talked about is they'll treat it like mulch, right? They don't integrate it in, right? And what you're doing is it's not just the organic matter for the nutrient content, but it's basically a feedstock and also an inoculum with biology. And what really builds soil that holds it together are these biofilms, right? What's a biofilm? Like when you wake up in the morning and your teeth is kind of slimy, when you got, kind of like, like kind of sand in your eyes or a little gummy or a little snot or like, any mucous membrane, right? But it's everything's an ecosystem. So one way to think of, oh yeah, that too. Yeah. So, and it's kind of interesting, like, and we understand these microbes live inside our gut, right? And we can think about an analogy of kind of what is a plant. It's like a gut turned inside out. Like you instead of the roots on the outside, which maximize surface area that attract associated bacteria, fungi, and nematodes, protozoa, all the other organisms inside our guts, we have these microvilli. We have these intestinal linings that are filled with bacteria, filled with organisms, and then function these roles. And instead of this kind of thick, nice biofilm, when you get really good compost that smear like mayonnaise, you have mucus, right? So it's this whole interface of the organic matter, but also the state it's in, right? And then things you affect it, like with your diet or health, and much in the way you would treat it. So yeah, I think like the important thing with the soil is like this organic continuum that you maintain. And one thing we've talked about when we reduce things down, but at what point, when you walk into like an old growth forest, right, and you see how much all this biodiversity and all these different things, right, and there's lots of different ecosystems as well. They're robust and feral and kind of that way. And what you kind of ask yourself, at what point does the plant end and the soil begin? And just this continued biological matter of the plants, but even too, when you get down to the granularity of okay, it's the plant growing into the soil and all these biofilms, and there's mycorrhizal fungi that are growing around in and associated with them. Then these fungi reach out, and then those fungi even have bacteria running along them, and then those bacteria have viruses on them controlling so they don't overcome populations, and then air and water. So yeah, it's kind of like that hermetic principle, like as above is below, or in physics they call it scale invariance, right? Like a fractal, regardless of scale, you see these similar branching patterns.